We have a quorum. The Senate will come to order. Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, January 26, 2023, message number 139. Mr. President, the following bills passed the House on third reading by the votes indicated. House Bill number 21, State Lands Use of Land Qualification Requirements, ayes 61, excused 1. Message number 141, January 26, 2023. House Bill number 25, School Capital Construction Transfers and Distributions, ayes 37, noes 24, excused 1. Message number 142, January 26, 2023. House Bill number 51, Legislator Constituent Service Allowance, ayes 33, noes 28, excused 1. Message number 143, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 70, Definition of Home-Based Educational Program, ayes 60, noes 1, excused 1. Message number 145, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 82, Defendant Mental Illness Examinations Amendments, ayes 61, excused 1. Message number 150, January 26, 2023. House Bill number 148, Airport Liquor Licenses Amendments. Ayes 59, noes 2, excused 1. From the House of Representatives, message number 140, January 26, 2023. Mr. President, the following bills passed the House in third reading in an amended form. House Bill number 24, State Investments Compensation and Relocation Amendments, ayes 49, noes 12, excused 1. Message number 144, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 76, Licensing Boards Amendments, ayes 48, noes 13, excused 1. Message number 146, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 97, Chancery Court Jurisdiction Amendments, ayes 53, noes 8, excused 1. Message number 147, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 81, Hospital Supplemental Payments Statutory Fix, ayes 36, noes 25, excused 1. Message number 148, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 134, Alcohol Sales to Licensees, ayes 61, excused 1. Message number 149, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 142, Notice of Annexation, ayes 59, noes 2, excused 1. Message number 152, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 90, Sex Offender Registration Requirements, ayes 50, noes 11, excused 1. Message number 153, January 26, 2023, House Bill number 112, Theft, Penalty for Fifth or Subsequent Offense, ayes 54, noes 7, excused 1. Signed, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
We're now at that order of business, introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Senate File 107, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 107, Acquisition, Exchange, and Sale of Trust Lands, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Senate File 107 is referred to Committee number 5, Agriculture. Folks, if you have any other bills for introduction, be sure and get them to me before we break out here today. Senator Nethercott. Oh, get out of practice really fast.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I move that Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act, be re-referred to Committee number 2, Appropriations. The bill does have an appropriation.
Without objection, it's so ordered. Any other re-referrals? It's going to Appropriations. Oh, where's it coming from? I'm sorry. Oh, it's in Committee of the Whole currently. We'll just take a break. It's a virtual bill, that's why it's so hard to find. We good? All right, reports from standing committees.
January 26, 2023. Mr. President, Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred Senate Joint Resolution 7, Support for Taiwan, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Guru, Jones, and Schuler. Senator Schuler, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 158, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, and Nethercott. No, Senator Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 145, State Budgeting and Reserves. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 128, Transfer of State Lands Exchange. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 92, Small Customer Electrical Generation. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Case, Landon, and Scott. No, Senators Barlow and Boner. Senator Landon, Acting Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 178, Mountain Lion Pursuit Seasons. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Jones, and Schuler. No, Senator Guru. Senator Schuler, Chairman. Please disregard reading of Senate File 145 from Committee Number 2, read in error.
That's the first time I've ever heard that message. That's brand new. You stumped us all. Good job. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we are at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. Vice President, I move the Senate resolve itself. Mr. Vice President, I move the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Motion carries. Senator Salazar. Yeah.
Committee of the Whole.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor.
Go ahead, Mr. Majority Leader.
So members of the body, he's also known as Senator Divide the Amendment at least 4 times and rule from the chair.
Don't believe him. Committee of the Whole will please come to order. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 89, Insurance Coverage for Hearing Aids. The reading clerk will read the bill. Thank you.
Senate File 89, Insurance Coverage for Hearing Aids, an act relating to insurance, sponsored by Senator Furphy. It was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. No, Senator Case. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Landon. I'm sorry.
Thank you. There, green means go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation. On Senate File 89, insurance coverage for hearing aids, there is a standing committee amendment. I would ask that that be read in at this time.
One moment, please. Senate File 89, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 4, line 8, delete.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that committee, or move that amendment, standing committee amendment, and for an explanation of this bill, I would ask that you call on the sponsor from Albany County.
Thank you. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, before I go through the bill, I want to explain how all this came about. What happened, I was approached by a group of individuals from my community and from the capital city of people with deaf and hard of hearing problems. And they explained how they're not being taken care of very well in our state. And they asked if I would schedule a meeting with the governor, which I did. And the governor showed up, as well as some of his top people. And the governor was touched by why we're not taking care of those people, really from birth through adulthood. We have a lot of children in our school system that have problems hearing, and they need interpreters. And quite honestly, the school districts are not hiring well-qualified interpreters. What happens is they hire someone from the university who's taken a course or two interpreting, but that doesn't work when you've got a child who has severe handicaps. And Mr. Chairman, at our committee meeting yesterday, we had a big group that drove into our capital city, and I was impressed. They came all the way from the western part of our state. I think I can go ahead and say that. Drove from Afton and Jackson Hole to come and testify for our committee meeting. I really appreciated that. We had 2 interpreters at our meeting, and the people who are using sign language, they got expressed well by the interpreters to our committee, and they're having severe problems. So that's how this bill came about. So what we did when we met with the governor signed his senior policy advisor, Jen Davis, to work on this project with me. And what happened is we've developed a strategy for dealing with the hard of hearing services. I've got this notebook. I'd be glad to share it with anyone who's interested. And the first step in our strategy is to get insurance companies to provide hearing aids to these people. Because otherwise, they have to try to come up with the money on their own. And a lot of them, as we heard testimony yesterday, they simply can't afford these hearing aids. And so they're struggling, trying to do without. And quite honestly, we heard one testimony. They said this individual needed hearing aids that cost $10,000. And without insurance coverage, he was not going to be able to afford to get new hearing aids. So, Mr. Chairman, that was the genesis of this bill. So I will, oh, by the way, we're the only state in the country that doesn't have a commission for the deaf. So we've got to try to take care of that. And that's part of our strategy. Developing a commission obviously is expensive. So the governor has helped sign one person in workforce services to try to coordinate through the other agencies to provide services to these people. So I'll run through the bill, Mr. Chairman. If you look at page 1 of the bill, it basically says, an act relating to insurance, requiring health insurance and disability insurance plans to provide coverage for hearing aids and provide professional services to support that. If you turn to page 2, Mr. Chairman, it just provides definitions. And a lot of these definitions are already provided in our statutes. But health insurance plan, as you can see, is defined there. Hearing aids are already defined in our statutes. Hearing aid professionals and dealers are already defined in our statutes, as you can see. Physician assistants, and hearing aid specialists. On page 3, Mr. Chairman, we explain what hearing aid professional services are. And as you can see, evaluating for hearing aids, fitting for hearing aids, programming for hearing aids, making impressions of the ear to fit the hearing aid, and then providing rehabilitation and training to those in need. If you look on page 3, line 19, here's a key part of the bill, Mr. Chairman. It said these insurance companies will only provide hearing aids to those, on line 19, medically necessary, and that's defined in our statutes already. So we're not just saying we're going to provide hearing aids coverage to everyone. What it is those who have been determined medically necessary to have hearing aids. If you turn to page 4, Mr. Chairman, on line 1, those who are requesting hearing aids through the insurance companies will still be subject to a deductible, co-payment, or co-insurance position that is required by the insurance companies. Section D, Mr. Chairman. What we're saying on line 8 is that the hearing aids could be replaced every, what it currently says is 3 years. And what I'd like to do now is I move approval of Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 89, Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion?
What that amendment does, Mr. Chairman, is change the 3 years to 5 years. So the insurance companies don't have to replace hearing aids every 3 years, but could be required to do it every 5 years. So we're changing that on line 8 and on line 12. So that's the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, hearing the question, all those in favor of Senator Furphy's motion to adopt the Standing Committee 1 to Senate File 89, please say aye. Those opposed? The Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 89 has passed. We're back on the bill. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now going back to the bill, on page 4, once again, we only require on line 14 when it's medically necessary. And Mr. Chairman, that's about it. The last page just saying this is effective out a year from now, to give the insurance companies an opportunity to adjust to this. We heard from them yesterday. They didn't seem to have really big objections. Of course, no insurance company wants to take on additional coverage, but they did testify at least, and we have made them aware of the bill. The fiscal note, Mr. Chairman, on the back, what we heard yesterday is this may be way off. We don't know at this point. I have talked to LSO. They're doing research on this. What the fiscal note did show is that all of the state employees would be eligible for hearing aids. And with the requirements in this bill, that may not be the case. So we're trying to find out what that could be, but we had testimony yesterday from the department heads. They said we can't determine that at this point, and we're trying to do that. I'm also asking LSO to research what could be the impact to the rest of us in the state who already are covered by insurance. Would our costs go up much by offering this program? So, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there and try to answer any questions.
Questions? The Majority Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I could not hear his explanation of the bill, and I was wondering if he could repeat it.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Anyone else? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. As you can see by the fiscal note, any impact of something that we do on this front would not be felt for another couple of years. Therefore, I didn't re-refer the bill in any way. There's no cost associated now. But just a couple more things about what we heard in committee, Mr. Chairman. This is something that I believe we heard that about 18 states out there have some kind of coverage on this front. We, of course, do not. No question that if we chose to take care of this pretty marginalized group, and boy, the testimony in committee was pretty moving, and it came from hundreds and hundreds of miles away. If we choose to do this, there is going to be a cost associated with it. Anyone who buys an insurance policy will be helping to float the boat for everyone. And just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that. I learned a lot a couple of days ago when this was in front of our committee. And one thing that I learned was that this group is far more marginalized than I believed or understood. And that's why we thought as a committee it was important to get it up here so that we can continue this conversation. It was important enough to the governor that he appointed one of his advisors, and she was terrific. She outlined several things that have been decided on this front or pointed toward. And so that's why the bill is here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, first a question, and question arises because I'm now out of date on in the healthcare area. There used to be, when the Obamacare Act first passed, that you put a new insurance mandate on, it didn't get covered by the feds in their subsidy programs. State had to pay for that. Is that mandate still there? Did something change that? Are we going to get stuck with the state paying for the full cost of this new insurance mandate? And Mr. Chairman, I don't know, and I'm asking.
Senator Furphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we talked to the health department, and they did talk about Medicare coverages that they currently provide. And that was the genesis of us moving from 3 years to 5 years. They said what they cover is 5-year periods, but they didn't seem to think that the state was going to be obligated to cover all insurance. They didn't mention that at all. If anyone else on the committee heard otherwise, please let me know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that the concern would have been raised by the insurance department, or they would be the ones that would be responsible for this, because as it's occurred in the past, as the good former chairman of the Labor Health Committee alluded to, it's the insurance commissioner that collects rate premiums, and then the state ends up rebating the insurer based on whatever expenses they have, if this falls outside of that federal nexus. So I think it wouldn't have been the Department of Health. That's a different issue. This would have come from the insurance commissioner, and they would have said, hey, we're going to have to do some rebating, basically, is the word that I think is used, to insurance companies as they provide this coverage. So that's where I think the discussion would be, and certainly I would defer to my colleague from Natrona County if I remember it incorrectly. Thank you.
Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the testimony we had the other day was pretty interesting and quite impactful. Just to get a few data points from Jen Davis over at the governor's office, she gave us some information on the YCHAP program, which has been around since the legislature, I guess, enacted it in about 2012. And so the problem with that is that kids age out after they hit 21, and it just mentions that about 10 of them will age out each year. And so those are the kids that their parents will have to try and come up with something for them. I asked about, the over-the-counter hearing aids that we see and hear about. I don't know that I ever got a price on those, but they said those work for some folks that may have the mild hearing loss. But for most of these folks we're talking about, they have pretty severe cases, and that's how come the statistics say that, the medically unnecessary are the ones that really have severe loss. So I don't know that the over-the-counters would really work for most of them. I know that in talking with a few other folks, it sounds like it's about $5,000 to $6,000 a year to get those hearing aids. And 5 years is about the max that you can get them to last and still be effective. One other thing that the governor's office pointed out is that if you just take a look at the CDC, they say that about 7% of people will start probably needing hearing aids after the age of 45. And so that, that's why it's still very difficult to know what the percentages would be of the number of people in Wyoming that, would need this service. But probably 7 to 8% is probably pretty close to what we'd be looking at. So with that, just a little more information.
Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Just a general question first, or a statement. My wife says I need hearing aids, which I disagree with. Just justification for the $2 million cost in the biennium, and just what kind of a hearing aid do you buy for $2,000, a piece in the world of hearing aids? I mean, what does that get somebody? for quality, I guess, from the highs and lows of hearing aids. Joke. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let's, in partial answer to that, let's look at this bill a bit. Because, Mr. Chairman, this bill is being sold on, that will help the people with profound and expensive problems. When you look at the bill on page 4, line 9, cost of not more than $2,000 per ear. That's the standard hearing aid that a lot of us buy. This critter that I've unfortunately had to buy, and that's right, it's in the price range of this ordinary hearing aid. There is a revolution going on in the hearing aid business. A lot of them are being sold over the counter that work pretty well. So I'd buy 5 or 6 of these, of those. But this bill is not aimed at the profoundly deaf that need special things. It won't solve their problem. It's aimed at being a mandate for the large part of the population that is sooner or later going to be in my boat and need hearing aids. And let me suggest to you that if you want to increase the price of health insurance in the state, this bill is a good place to start. Mandates are one of the major things that pre-Obamacare was running up health insurance costs. Obamacare took care of that by just mandating everybody to it. And that's one of the reasons it increased the cost of health insurance so much. This is taking that a step further. It's trying to make everything dependent on either the government or some kind of government mandate. I think you're much better off, particularly with the revolution that's going on, for ordinary hearing problems. Keep the government out of it, keep the government mandates out of it, let the private marketplace deal with it as to whether the demand is sufficient. And if you think it isn't going to be costly, look at the fiscal note. $1 million a year, looking at their figure for 2025 for state employees if they're covered. They might not be covered because we're self-insured. And a significant part of our population, general population, isn't self-insured. But you think, I don't know what percentage of the total workforce are state employees. And that small percentage is going to cost $1 million a year. You've got a mandate here that is really going to drive the cost of health insurance up. And, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to think pretty seriously about what we're doing here. We have historically avoided insurance mandates for just that reason. We've had a few, but they do run the cost up. And if that's what your objective is, this is the place to start.
Senator Landon.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the tall senator was quite eloquent in showing you the flip side of the coin, and that's why I said right up front, this absolutely will be something that the rest of Wyoming will have to step up a little bit to help this marginalized population. The only reason that they don't have coverage now is that it has not been mandated. The only way to get them the kind of help they need is through an instrument like this, and that came out of the task force that you heard about. I kind of commend the sponsor for trying to put a limit on this because, you know, like the rest of us, he understood that this was going to be a lift. It's something, real policy discussion, and you have to limit some things somewhere. And that's why the limit is in the bill. The fact that it would assist others who become medically needy of these devices, That's a byproduct of the bill, but to say that it isn't going to help the profoundly deaf is not correct. That is still the goal of this bill. We can certainly work it some more. From an administrative standpoint, there was not a lot of alarm from our insurance commissioner. There wasn't a lot of detail from our insurance folks, and we have asked for both. And we hope to get that. If it gets over to second reading, we'll be happy to share a little bit more information with you, Mr. Chairman. I think that might give us a little better idea of how you and I might be impacted, for example. So hope that helps to answer a couple of questions. Thank you.
Further questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 89, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Senate File 89 is passed committee of the whole. Division being called. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed, please rise. Thank you. Being 9 ayes and 13 noes, the bill is, yes, pursuant to SR 6-5, having failed a standing division vote, a roll call vote is required. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call vote. Senate File 89, Anderson. Excuse. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman.
Excused.
Excused. Boner. No. Bouchard. No. Brennan. No. Case. No. Cooper. No. Dockstader. No. Ellis. Aye. French. Excuse. Furphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. No. Hutchings. No. Ide.
Excused.
Excused. Jones. No. Kinski. No. Cole. No. Landon. Aye. Larson. No. McEwen.
Excused.
Excused. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas.
Excused.
Excused. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar.
No.
No. Schuler. Aye. Scott. No. Steinmetz. No. President Driscoll.
Excused.
Excused. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 89. 9 aye, 15 no, 7 excused.
Senate File 89, having failed a roll call vote pursuant to SR 6, is deemed indefinitely postponed. Minority Leader,
Mr. Chairman, may I have the privilege of the floor for a moment?
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for a brief pause, we have a guest here today that is the 2023 Crook County #1 Teacher of the Year, Miss Lila Kana. You'd stand up and wave a little bit. And we've met Lila before because it was Lila's class several years ago up in Crook County that came down here for the sagebrush bill. and got that bill passed here. And now, a number of years later, she is joining us and visiting and is the Teacher of the Year up in that county. And we know she's done a tremendous job over the years. She's been here with us. She led that class through the exercise. Let's welcome her to the Senate today.
Good to have you here. Mr. Vice President.
May I have the privilege of the floor?
Absolutely.
Folks, I'd like you to welcome to the Wyoming Senate some of our folks from my district. I've got Mayor Richard Bridger. If you stand up when I call your name, I can't see you behind that panel. Councilman Terry Weitzel, Sheridan. Bev Leichman, a Deputy Administrator, I think, of City of Sheridan. Buffalo Mayor Schrader, and Councilman Scott Madsen. Please give them a warm Wyoming Senate welcome.
The next bill up for consideration is Senate File 130. The reading clerk will read the bill.
Senate File 130, Educational Freedom Act, sponsored by Senator Hutchings, an act relating to education. Was referred to Committee Number 4, Education, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Weitman, Brennan, Scott, and Steinmetz. No, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, Chairman.
You've heard a reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move in the Committee of the Whole rise and report to do so with the recommendation that Senate File 130 do pass. There were no standing committee amendments, and I yield to the sponsor, Senator Hutchins, for an explanation of this good little Senate file.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman of the Education Committee. This bill is not a bill that I thought of bringing. It was kind of brought to my attention, and I liked what was being said in the proposed piece of legislation, so I thought I would bring it to you to hopefully become law. There is a faction in our nation that is promoting educational material that is in opposition to our U.S. and Wyoming constitutions. And the heretical dogma is spreading to our classrooms, our universities, our military bases. This material has been deemed inherently divisive and, in my eyes, very destructive. Our students should spend more time reading and writing than worrying about so-called privilege of other students. Parents are removing their children from our public schools. Military people are being asked to leave Wyoming as quickly as they can via transfers, early transfers, and some of our university alumni are pulling their support from our university. And as we heard earlier, I'm gonna skip that point. Studying the truth of our past is what got me here in the legislature. I began reading about our nation's history and truly fell in love with it and what the founders envisioned for us. This is despite the evil of the past we inherited from the great country across the ocean. My job is, and I hope that of every student, is to look forward and expect better things of us all. There's no way you can move forward if you're constantly looking behind you. I'm not saying the past is not important, so I agree with a quote by Samuel that is attributed to Samuel Adams. It is the interest of tyrants to reduce people to ignorance and vice. I bring this bill to you with hopes that our students will not be reduced to ignorance and vice, but that they can learn to read and study on their own the truth of our past via the many reliable documents, letters, and books that are available to us. A nation divided cannot stand. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will go over Senate File 130 for you. Just to bring it to your attention, the Superintendent of Public Instruction has gone through the bill and has offered another placement for the bill. And so we'll be working on that, maybe bringing a possible amendment in the future. I'm not sure just right now. But if you go to page 2, you'll see that we're asking that instruction on topics enumerated in this section of the bill and any supporting material will be consistent with the following principles of individual freedom. Number 1 comes from, or I, Romanet I comes from our Wyoming Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, that all members of the human race are equal. And on page 3, Romanets 2, 3 through 5, all citizens are politically equal as the laws of the state this state affecting the political rights and privileges of its citizens. And I won't read the whole thing, but it's in Article 1, Section 3 of the Wyoming Constitution. Note, ethnicity is inherently superior, which is of great concern. Article 7, Section 12 of our Wyoming Constitution. Romanet 4, no person shall be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly on the basis of ethnicity, color, national origin, so on and so forth. Number 5, mediocrity or traits, including solid work ethics, are not racist, but fundamental to the right to pursue happiness and to be rewarded for industriousness. Page 4, Romanet 6, no person by virtue of his ethnicity or sex bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same ethnicity or sex. Number 7 just talks about instructional personnel may talk about things that we have differences on, but they should make sure that they have both sides of the story. Number C, administrative personnel should not implement programs or policy that adversely reflect upon a person because of his race, color, creed, so on and so forth. On page 5, we have the Board of Trustees of our school districts shall not provide an educational program pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21.3.110 that adversely reflects upon a person because of his ethnicity, so on and so forth. The rest of page 5 talks about the definitions, and that's pretty much what we'd like to add to our statutes, Mr. Chairman. I sit for questions.
Any questions? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, not a question. I rise in support of this bill. It sets forth, deals with some of the issues we've got now by setting forth how we want the teaching done on issues of race inequality and that sort of thing. And it's based very closely on the provisions in our Constitution, and those are very good. I think that the principles we're setting forth here, I hope every member of the Senate can agree with. I will tell you in committee, the education union, the teachers union came forward and said, well, we like the principles, but we think it ought to be, the legislature ought not to tell us. They wanted the State Board of Education to do that. I have my problems with the State Board of Education. They've tended to make everything a priority with the result that nothing is. So I think this is an appropriate vehicle, and I would particularly call the Senate's attention to the provision at the top of page 4, starting at line 1. And this explicitly allows the use of materials that are inconsistent with our beliefs. And saying, yes, you can teach what those materials are, you can have the students read them, review them, but then the obligation is to say, how are they different from the principles enunciated here. And we had in committee some very eloquent testimony, Mr. Chairman, from a teacher. I think she was sixth grader or middle school teacher, saying this allows her to teach history as it actually is and do it well, and I think she was exactly right. So I call your attention to that. We will expose our kids, as is age appropriate, to the opposing points of view that are out there, and just point out how they're different from what our general principles are. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would strongly urge the Senate to adopt this piece of legislation.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm delighted to hear that the bringer of the bill is working with the Superintendent of Public Instruction. That's the right way to do it. And I'll convey to her these state standards, content and performance standards for social studies, and perhaps you can ask the superintendent if there's an easy way to fold this bill right into the existing standards with some modification. That way we're not making additional work. We're just incorporating it into the existing, and I'll pass that along. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a no in committee, and I think it's important to note that while the teacher that spoke on the bill did say that that particular paragraph was important to keep in the bill, that teacher opposed the bill for the same reason that I opposed the bill, which is that this isn't the role of the legislature. We're not supposed to determine what truth is and what curriculum is and what should and shouldn't be taught in schools. We have a process for that through the standard setting program and the curriculum setting program. We've been through this before several times. And the procedure for the state, which is the right procedure to ensure that education, particularly historical education, is not politicized, it is effectively the truth. That process is to have standard setting, which is done by the State Board of Education. Social studies and civics is actually up at this point in time moving forward. And then local school districts are required to set the curriculum to achieve those standards. While it's pretty hard to argue with a lot of the incredible points that we have here in terms of aspirations, and particularly, I mean, the first three Romanettes that are provided under paragraph B, which are basically from Article 1 of the Wyoming Constitution. And we definitely need to be teaching Article 1 of the Wyoming Constitution and have those tenets as core values of all that we do. But that doesn't mean, Mr. Chairman, we should only teach things that are consistent with them, because honestly, I think most of us learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So it's not the times when we've upheld those constitutional values that are particularly poignant for us to understand. Mr. Chairman, it's the times where we failed to achieve those values that we really need to understand. And when the legislature starts putting the thumb on the scale and saying, well, we can talk about this, but we can't talk about that because that makes us look bad, and we don't want to feel bad about our past. We don't want to accept that maybe we did some things wrong at some point. We always want to make ourselves the hero in the story. We're always the protagonist. That's just not the case. And if we don't want to repeat history, we have to learn history. And regrettably, it wasn't all good. Our ancestors screwed up a few things here and there. I hope we learn from those things. Legislation like this tries to sort of sweep those things under the rug and say, no, everything's okay. We need to let the process work and trust the process that allows a standard setting and curriculum setting routine to proceed. We also need to have a little bit of faith in our local school boards. Again, each member duly elected, just like us. each of them with ties to the local communities that they're educating. Better than this body, because again, they're tied specifically to their community where we're supposed to come represent all communities at a higher level policy. So I do understand that as we read this, it's hard to not like the points that we go through. But again, it's okay to agree with the values expressed in a bill and still recognize that it's not the right policy approach in achieving those values, Mr. Chairman. So once again, I'll ask the body to resist the temptation to use our heavy hand of the legislature to dictate what is and isn't taught in schools.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. I just had a couple of questions about this bill. I'll start with this one. I'm reading paragraph C on page 4. Administrative personnel, I have a little experience there, shall not implement programs or policies that adversely reflect anybody. I'm just wondering from the sponsor if that is counter to what we passed out of the third reading this morning. A bill which requires all kinds of things of our administrators at the elementary level. Just would like a little more conversation on that one. Thank you.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, the copy that I was using as I discussed this bill was not probably the one that you have on your desk. I'll try to go backwards and answer the good senator from Casper's question first. I too have issues with that paragraph, and we're looking at an amendment to that, so that may be removed. That did bring up a little bit of controversy when we were discussing it with the superintendent. And as for the good senator from Albany County, he has the bill all wrong. That's not what I'm trying to do, dictate curriculum at all. That's not what the bill is trying to do. And good try, but we're trying to make a point that there is a faction. There is something going on in our schools right now, and we're just trying to combat it with this bill to stop the divisiveness that's going on in our country today. Like I said, if we're gonna stand here divided, we're never gonna be strong. So I appreciate his philosophical difference on the bill, but that's not what this bill is trying to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, 2 points. One with regard to that paragraph C on page 4. Basically, I read that, I think the wording is a little awkward, but I read that as saying the administrative personnel shouldn't discriminate on the basis of race. That's how I read it, and maybe the language can be improved. With regard to the allegation that we're not going to be teaching about our mistakes. Mr. Chairman, read the bill. The bulk of the bill does say, let's teach about the best things in our culture. And, you look back over the whole sweep of human history, we have been making steady progress since civilization began to having a more just and a more equal society. And this country in recent years has led the way, and the principles we're asking to be taught here represent the best that this country has had to offer, and it's very good. But you look at the language on the top of page 4, that is explicitly designed and does allow us to encourage us to teach about the mistakes, providing we point out that they were mistakes, that they were inconsistent with our ideals. And certainly, anybody that knows anything about American history knows that the country had some things in its history, slavery in particular, that were inconsistent with our ideals. Mr. Chairman, took a bloody civil war. My ancestors fought in that civil war, part of the 2nd Massachusetts Regiment, to end that particular problem, and we succeeded. That is part of our history. You need to teach about it. And teach about some of the evils there. And this allows that, provided they point out how those are inconsistent with those ideas. And that is how you learn from your mistakes. And frankly, I think it is the duty of the legislature to set forth some of these basic principles that this is what ought to be taught in the schools. I think that's, I have to be consistent with the Campbell decisions, but in particular, I think that's our duty. And this will be guidance to the State Board of Education going forward. I think that's appropriate. On and for the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly didn't want to give the idea to the sponsor that I'm opposed to the ideals of the bill at all. In fact, commend her for bringing it. One of the problems that you run into when you bring a bill from somewhere else, however, is that we don't just vote on the title. And going to what the chairman of the Education Committee just pointed out, if this is guidance and if we're going to get into this realm, I would take you to the paragraph at the top of page 2, which the final sentence in that paragraph says the instruction above shall be given for at least 3 years in kindergarten through 8th grade and for 1 year each in the secondary and college grades. I can only speak from my experience over 30 years of experience in teaching and administration at the college in Central Wyoming. And that's part of the Gen Ed core. This exists on a level where there are a couple of semesters expected out of an undergraduate in the area of civics, United States government. In fact, one of the teachers at that college is the co-chairman on the other side of the Judiciary Committee. And I would encourage anyone to go visit with that teacher. He does a tremendous job. I've been invited into his classroom and been privileged to guest lecture a little bit. But we already have these standards in place. But what this does is it rides over the top of that and says, we're going to have to expand the Gen Ed core, which eliminates some of the electives that a student is going to be able to take, because you're going to have to go, the way I read this, it says 4 years in a row you must take courses related to this. So my concern is not the idea of the bill, it's just that we don't just vote on the idea of the bill. There's some things in it that I think deserve our attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as to the last point, page 2, lines 8 through 10, the 4 years are currently an existing statute, which requires that instruction be given at least 3 years in kindergarten through 8th grade and 1 year each in secondary and college grades. So that's already in the existing statute. As for wanting to make ourselves the hero, turn to page 4, lines 1 through 11, and I believe the sponsor addressed this. Instructional personnel may facilitate discussions and use curricula to address in an age-appropriate manner the topics of sexism, slavery, racial oppression, racial segregation, and racial discrimination, including topics related to the act and enforcement of laws resulting in that. Classroom instruction may include materials inconsistent with Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 3 of the Wyoming Constitution, and classroom instruction shall identify those inconsistencies. I don't know how you could make it more balanced. What the rest of this bill is pushing back against is critical race theory being adopted in the classroom. That's really what it's pushing. The thought that every American institution is inherently racist and must be destroyed in order to rebuild society. That is CRT. And it leads to conclusions like this. Freedom of speech is a construct of the majority to suppress the minority. Therefore, we must abrogate the freedom of speech and cancel those who speak contrary to the CRT philosophy. That's progressivism in America. This is pushing back against that, and appropriately so, in a manner that says, we are going to teach what is good about America and where we have failed. We are not going to teach that our whole society is so flawed that it must be destroyed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at least I think we're understanding now a little bit about what isn't supposed to be taught, and I appreciate the last speaker elucidating some of the topics that shouldn't be taught under this. And the premise then that there are topics that we need to keep out of the classroom, and that perhaps the intent of this bill is to keep those topics from being discussed, is ironically contrary to the First Amendment in terms of the freedom of rights and freedom of speech that are inherent. So the idea then being to protect the First Amendment, to protect our freedom of speech, we need to ensure that we ban certain topics from being addressed and discussed in school. I love the irony if it's a lesson in irony, but if it's a lesson in civics and in constitutional rights and in the types of things that we really need to explore, the idea that this bill is specifically targeting critical race theory, which it doesn't say clearly, but perhaps that is the target, is disappointing. So I guess I'll ask that. What else is being targeted? And going to the sponsor, is this to ensure that critical race theory cannot be discussed in a classroom, or perhaps, if it can be discussed, is it just that the teacher has to take the side against critical race theory at the end of the discussion so that we can have the right protagonist in the script? One more question, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps this is to any proponent of the bill. Where is this being done, and where is the conspiracy coming from, and which are the schools that we're trying to block the divisiveness from taking place? Because, Mr. Chairman, to me, it's actually these bills in the legislature and the political process that are fueling the divisiveness. It's not the schools. I actually don't see a lot of divisivity in the classrooms. We've had some of the best teachers in the state over the last few days, and I hope everyone in here had an opportunity to chat with some of them. I would encourage the members of this body to go talk to your best teachers, talk to your administrators, and say, hey, do you want us to pass this bill and tell you what to do? Use their judgment. Draw upon their judgment, because to me, this is politics. This is an education we're talking about right here. It is divisive, but it's not divisive in the classroom. Nobody's fighting about it there. Just in legislatures and perhaps news programs and social media around the country. Let's let teachers teach.
Senator Hutchins.
I'd like to try to answer some of those questions and then get to the questions. In the military, we have a phrase that sometimes when someone speaks out or says something, they've thrown a turd in the punch bowl, and that's what I think has just happened. A turd has been thrown in the punch bowl. Not once in this bill have we talked about banning topics. We're not targeting anything, and there's no conspiracy. Those are the turds, okay? So to get back to the point, we've made it very clear, and I spoke very clearly to my senator in my opening statement that I'm not trying to cover the past, push it under a rug. The past is very important. Like I said, the past is ugly, but I want to look forward to the future. There was one other question. We did say that we're concerned about the placement and that we're going to try to fix that. So if the good senator to the right of me is concerned about where it is, he can come to me and add and bring me some suggestions. Article 7, Education, Section 20, the duty of the legislature is to protect and promote health and morality of the people. As the health and morality of the people are essential to their well-being and to the peace and permanence of the state, It shall be the duty of the legislature to promote and protect, which vital interests, these vital interests by such measures for the encouragement of temperance and virtue, and such restrictions upon vice and immorality of every sort as are deemed necessary to the public welfare. On and for the bill, I ask for the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 130, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. The chair is in doubt. Those in favor, please stand. Those opposed? Nineteen ayes, 4 noes. The Senate File 130 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Senator Grew,
Privilege of the floor.
please.
Ladies and gentlemen of the 67th, with us today are my mayor and one of my councilmen, Mayor Haley Morton Levinson, Councilman Jimbo Rooks, and Town Clerk Riley Taylor. Horse lovers all up there. Ready to give them a big hand.
Good to have you here. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 2. The clerk will read in the bill.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, recognizing the service of Lester C. Hunt, sponsored by Senator Case. A joint resolution recognizing United States Senator and Wyoming Governor and Secretary of State Lester Callaway Hunt as a consummate model to public servants for his distinguished career, his commendable civility and courage, and his service to Wyoming and the United States of America. Was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when a committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that Senate Joint Resolution 2 do pass. And there is an amendment on the bill. If I could have that read in, please.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 7, after.
I would move that Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 2, and I will turn over the explanation of the bill and the amendment to the gentleman in the corner with the great haircut.
The Honorable Senator from Fremont County, Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also from Fremont County, and well noted. Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'm here to talk about another person from Fremont County. And I want to dial things back a few years. And the year is 1954. Mr. Chairman, it's June 19th, 1954. And I want to talk about the service of a man who's served this great state, served this nation, and the events surrounding his life brought this nation to a standstill and changed the course of American history. It's that big a story. It's also a story about the wrecking ball literally wrecking ball of suicide. And how suicide, is this atomic bomb of exploding impacts on people's lives. And I know that this legislature is committed to look and do something about the fact that Wyoming has the highest rate of suicide in the country. It's particularly a problem. It's one of the number one means of death of young people. So on June 19th, 1954, Lester C. Hunt, who had had a long, distinguished career, he had arrived in Lander, Wyoming, in the first decade of the 1900s to play baseball for a local semi-pro team. I love baseball. That's a good story. That's got my interest. He met a woman then, and he went away and he put himself through dental school. He did it by working full-time for the railroad and attending dental school. He got his dental license, and he returned back to Lander, Wyoming. Opened a practice. The year was 1917. In 1918, he answered the call of his country. He served admirably in World War I in the dental corps. And after the war, he became in the reserves. And he was actually serving in the reserves at the time of his death, June 19th, 1954. Became a major in the reserves. He got involved in politics. A friend of his happened to be kind of close to me, because a friend of his was George Case, my father. My father had been in and out of Lander, and he was a traveling salesman, and he returned to Lander in the early 1930s. About the same time that Lester Hunt ran for office, his first office, served 2 terms in the Wyoming House of Representatives. Might have been only 1 term, I'm trying to remember that one. Then he ran for Secretary of State. He won it. He served 2 terms as Wyoming Secretary of State. He had a great career. He's the guy that had the Bucking Horse and Rider. And when the legislature kind of failed to act to protect that copyright on the Bucking Horse and Rider, he did it himself personally. They thought he was trying to take advantage of it, but he did it personally to register the trademark so that Wyoming could have it. And he commissioned Alan Tupper True, the guy that made these murals up here, related to the great family that served Wyoming so well, to commission that light Bucking Horse license plate. That wasn't the only thing he did, but that was his career as Secretary of State. Then he ran for governor. He became a wartime governor and served during World War II. Can't even imagine what that would be like, Mr. Chairman, that all the details of rallying for the war and meeting our war quotas and all of these things, and also dealing with great controversies of the time, like the internment camp, Hart Mountain internment camp. There were a lot of people that thought that at Hart Mountain, folks were getting a really smooth deal, that we were treating the Japanese people too gently, and that they were being pampered. Literally, the writings from this day are so acidic. And Lester Hunt went up there to look at the situation, Governor Hunt, and he determined, the conditions weren't Club Med, so to speak, in the times of the day. And he stood up to the folks that were criticizing the opulent conditions of the camps. And the camps are one of the darkest period of our history. It's not something we can actually, we talk about evaluating history and all the things that happened, but the internment camp was where we rounded up U.S. citizens and put them in camps without due process. And with, it doesn't pan out very well in history. But we got through that. Governor Hunt was reelected to a 2nd term. And by the way, he had lots of notable accomplishments, including providing health care and pension reform. And then he resigned in the middle of his second term when an open Senate seat came up. He was elected to the United States Senate. That was in 1948. He began he was elected to the U.S. Senate. He landed in the Senate right at this very controversial and time in our history where the Senate, first of all, was very divided. And our country was extremely divided. We were very afraid. We were very afraid as a country. Within Lester Hunt's first Senate term, his only Senate term, the Soviet Union exploded the first hydrogen bomb. People were scared of that. There was the Korean War, expansion of communism. People were afraid. There was this U.S. Senator, his name was Joseph McCarthy. And he was on a mission to rid the government of communists. He believed that there were communists in lots of different levels of government, and he said he had lists of names and said he had lists of names, but we never did see the list of names. But in the hunt for communists, I didn't really mean that pun, I'm sorry about that. But in searching for communists, they did ruin a lot of people's lives. They blacklisted people, you know, there were people that lost their jobs all across the country. The outcome was traumatic. It wasn't long, though, that our senator from Wyoming was standing up to the excesses of Joseph McCarthy. And it's hard to believe how charismatic Joseph McCarthy was and how well thought of he was in Washington and by politics all across the country. He was the rising star that was going to be the next hope of the country. And so people paid attention when he spoke. And he was very flamboyant and dramatic, and he made his points. Well, in the end, they didn't really find a lot of communists, Mr. Chairman. And so they sort of turned their attention to homosexuals. And they thought, the thinking at the time was that if a person is gay and they serve in government, that they could be open to blackmail. That their lifestyle being secretive could be revealed, and they could be compromised by Soviet agents, which were apparently everywhere. And, you know, people were afraid at this time. Not entirely unfounded fears either. I'm not trying to make that case. So Lester Hunt stood up to Joseph McCarthy. He called him out on several occasions. They served on committees together. They served on a committee about organized crime. They served on a committee, Lester Hunt served on a committee that actually went to Europe to investigate war crimes from a massacre of the German soldiers and the Nazis did of American personnel during the Battle of the Bulge. And Lester Hunt helped to resolve that situation, not entirely in the way that you might think. And he was instrumental in making sure that our former enemies who had committed atrocities against American soldiers got fair due process. He served on a national committee about organized crime. They had hearings all around the state. Joseph McCarthy wasn't a member of that committee, but he accompanied that committee, and it was a nice platform to talk about his agenda around the country. There were more and more clashes. The thing to remember about the time is that the United States Senate was fairly evenly divided. A one-seat margin would have made the difference. And the question was, should Lester Hunt was planning to run for re-election. He planned to serve a long time as our senator. He was a member of the minority party, that we would call it in this body today. And at that time, the politics had changed in Wyoming a little bit, and we had a Republican governor. Well, Lester Hunt had a son who's lived a long life and just passed away a few years ago, Lester Hunt Jr. Lester Hunt Jr., of course, he was from Lander, and people knew him. My family knew him. But Lester Hunt Jr. Was arrested in a park in Washington, D.C. By a male undercover for soliciting prostitution. He was 21 or 22 years old. Normally that sort of situation, the morals police, as they would say, were kind of went easy on people that had first-time offenses. Buddy Hunt was enrolled in divinity school. He wanted to be an Episcopal priest. So basically he wasn't charged initially. Well, people started finding out about this, and remember, with this very divided Senate, we're getting to the point where should Lester Hunt run again? He's trying to make up the decision to run for Senate again. And of course he wanted to do that. But the members of the other party brought up the fact about his son and said if he didn't not run, they were going to push the issue about his son, which they ended up doing. They had the case refiled by bringing in the prosecuting guy into the offices of the Republican leadership. And they told this policeman that they had to refile the charges. And then they were under the auspices of the federal court, not the DC City Court. They got it moved. And so they brought the charges against Lester Hunt Jr. His mom and dad went to the trial. Our senator sat in that trial. And when it was over, there was a small fine, and it was over. And there was a newspaper story about it. It was made the rounds about the East Coast, but it didn't get a lot of prominence in Wyoming at the time. And so colleagues of Joseph McCarthy, two senators, charged that one of them especially said, unless you decide not to run again, we are going to produce 25,000 mailers, mail them to every household in Wyoming with a newspaper story about your son. This went on for several months, and trying to agonize about what he's going to do. He kind of became a little bit withdrawn. The accounts of the time say he quit taking lunch with his colleagues in the lunchroom and became a little bit more withdrawn. It all culminated with a speech that McCarthy gave on June 18th, where he said he had some dirt on another senator. On June 19th, 1954, Lester Hunt went in his office in the Russell office building. He was carrying a .22 rifle. He walked past the doorman. They had exchanged pleasantries, went up to his office. He wrote 4 notes to people in his family. And he fired the gun into his head. He was found by the chief of staff, who came in to work on this Saturday morning, and they had some things to do. He was taken to the hospital. He lived for a few hours. And everything about our country changed on that day. We think about how you organize things now. Try to organize a funeral, think of all this. What happened was June 19th, Saturday, there was a service for Lester Hunt in Washington, D.C. at Trinity Episcopal Church on Monday, the 21st. The United States Congress adjourned for Monday and Tuesday. On Monday night, two Air Force planes came to Cheyenne, Wyoming. One of them contained 17 members of Congress and staffers from the Eisenhower administration. The other one carried Lester Hunt's body with an honor guard after they loaded the planes, after Lester Hunt lied in state on that Monday before the funeral, which was at 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon in Washington, D.C. The next day, there was service in Cheyenne. In Cheyenne, they say that thousands of people lined the streets. The church was filled, and Lester Hunt is buried in Bethel Cemetery here. I just can't even imagine how the country organized this. You know, it went to the president, the Congress was adjourned, we came to Cheyenne, Wyoming, we did all this. That's change, but the change I'm talking about is that a few months later, Joseph McCarthy was censored by the United States Senate. In a very, very divisive time in our political history, incredibly brutal, more brutal than you can think of maybe about present history or recent history or anything like that. It was incredibly brutal. And this man rode through it the best he can. He took his own life, but he lived his life with decency and civility, and he did the best he can. And he's never really been recognized by this legislature. And that's the purpose of this resolution today. So I submit to you the resolution. The Standing Committee amendment helps to correct some tiny factual issues. And I'd love to discuss the resolution with you, but I think I've gone on too far. The point is, I don't think there's any other single person from Wyoming to change the course of a nation as this man did. Perhaps whenever people take their own life, they never realize what they do to other people. I talk about the wrecking ball. They always think they're maybe providing healing to other people or help. I'm making the situation better. Well, of course he didn't do that. But he did do one thing. He changed the United States' attitudes about the rampant, horrible politics being promoted by a United States senator, and it directly led to the United States senator being censured. That's in history. The blackmail is in history. I'm trying to be very true to history. So this one man who took his own life and caused so much havoc did such a great thing for our country. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Majority Leader.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the history lesson as a student of history, but I do have a couple of concerns, and maybe my colleague can illustrate because we don't certainly want to mischaracterize our history. I think this gets into the debate we had on the last bill, but if we go to page 4 and we look at line 10 through 14, and here's my concern. It talks about, that Lester C. Hunt endured threats and intimidation, factual information to which death can be directly attributed this is my concern, during this dark and harsh period of our nation's political journey characterized by incivility, irrational politics, political dogma, and unfounded beliefs. That may be true, Mr. Chairman, but there's also some good things that had happened at that time during our history. And to take this and characterize that everything was bad from the time that Lester Hunt served the state of Wyoming and the people of this country, I think is a mischaracterization. In 1949, NATO was established. 1951, the Japanese Peace Treaty ending the official cessation of the hostilities between this country and Japan and normalized relationship. 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. Same period, Korean War Armistice Agreement signed, a ceasefire. 1954, I wouldn't characterize this as a dark day in our history. In 1954, the ruling from the Supreme Court on Brown and the Board of Education, eliminating segregation of our public school systems. Mr. Chairman, I think that like all things, we've had some dark times during our history. But during the same time, we can also point to some things that were very beneficial and that we should be proud of. And so I just would ask my colleague, is there some way that we can reflect the good things that happened in this country during that time frame and not just dwell on the dark things? So that would be my first question, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to bring attention to the excesses of McCarthyism and how it directly led to a native son. No, he wasn't a native son. He was from Illinois, but certainly a prominent person from my hometown and a prominent citizen of Wyoming to take his own life. And I appreciate the good senator's notion that lots of other good things could happen at that time. I really want to just focus on the excesses of McCarthyism. And I do think that the threats and intimidation and the attempted blackmail to which his untimely death can be directly attributed during this dark and harsh period of our nation's political journey characterize, maybe we could say the McCarthy excesses of our political journey characterized by incivility. I mean, I'm happy to tie it to McCarthy. And so, we don't usually use proper names and stuff like this. Joseph McCarthy was censored by the United States Senate. And so I'm happy to tie that to that. And Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I don't want to take any of those other accomplishments out. It wasn't a terrible time. This isn't a terrible time. But we do have some incivility, and we do have some other things that maybe we could learn about. I'm happy to do that, and I'll work with you to do that. I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you, sir.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I hear, he was a very good man. However, this smacks of BLM movement, going back and talking about all sorts of things that happened in the past that I wouldn't agree with today. And, but in the past, that was the normal course of things. I'm not saying it was right today, but I'm not going to stand here and support the idea of scoliating situations that happened that we would never repeat now. I'm not going to rewrite history. I'm not going to shame somebody in the back in the day for whatever they've done because they did it in that period in time. And I think it needs to be brought out. And I don't think that was the intent of this, but I certainly would appreciate having a different frame of reference to honor this man. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I've got one other thing that I hope my colleague from Fremont County can help me with. So if we go to page 6 and we go to section 3. And clearly, I'm not trying in any way to suggest that I don't agree with what the intent is here, but I want to understand when we get to this section, it says that the members of the Wyoming legislature commit to ever vigilant and do all they can do to prevent suicide and be diligent on battling against justice and inequities, discrimination. I think that's great, but I'm just wondering all they can to prevent suicide. So I'm trying to understand, what does that effectually mean if I vote for this resolution? Am I voting as a member of the Senate? Does this somehow obligate me to something in the future? But if we could just get a little bit of discussion on that so I can get a little more comfortable with what the intent is.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to the testimony twice, and I'm not getting any of that. What I'm getting is, don't go after a guy's family. Don't do the vicious things. That's what I'm getting. I support the bill.
Further discussion? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, we do have an amendment.
You want to dispose of that?
I think it'd be a good idea, Mr. Chairman. And I want this to be, really accurate. So that's the purpose of the amendment. So the first part of the amendment is page 1, line 7. It says, whereas after first coming to Wyoming in 1911 as a recruit to play semi-professional baseball for the Lander team, Lester C. Hunt, and we're striking the words move permanently, substituting returned to Wyoming in 1917 to start his family and dental practice after working full-time on the railroad to fund his attendance at dental school. Then, Mr. Chairman, page 2, line 16, whereas Lester C. Hunt, we're going to strike out, became the first person to serve for 2 consecutive terms. He wasn't. But whereas Lester C. Hunt was elected to 2 consecutive terms as governor of Wyoming, holding office during and after World War II, among Governor Hunt's many accomplishments, in addition to managing wartime concerns, he oversaw, it says the word creation, will strike creation and substitute implementation of a pension system for teachers, and advocated for a pension system for state employees, as well as expanded system of health benefits. Mr. Chairman, I now go to page 4, line 10, whereas Lester C. Hunt endured threats, we're striking the word and put a comma after threats, endured threats, intimidation, and attempted blackmail, to which his untimely death can be directly attributed. And then, Mr. Chairman, the only last one is page 5, line 19, whereas Lester C. Hunt, with inserting the word civility, decency, and courage, contributed to the survival and preservation of a principled system of participatory government that has carried this nation to the darkest of times. Thank you, Mr.
Yes, so I believe this amendment was actually moved by Senator Baldwin.
Correct.
So all those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion to adopt the Standing Committee 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 2, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion to adopt Standing Committee 1 has passed. We're back on the bill. Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let the body know I've spoken to the bringer of the bill. I do have, we'll propose an amendment tomorrow on page 5, lines 14 through 17. I'd like to have that stricken from the resolution. In my eyes, I don't like the way we have a kind of a guy decades later jumping in, kind of being a little uncivil in his comments. So I think that should be removed, and I'll just be bringing that tomorrow, hopefully as a friendly amendment. So thank you.
Any other discussion? Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, on and for the resolution, I appreciate the resolution. I do think it's important for us to look at the history of the state of Wyoming, history of the country, and to understand the difficult times and understand the sacrifices that have been made. It gets back to a lot of what we talk about this institution, the history of this institution, and how important this work is. But the emphasis, as I see it, of this resolution does come down to things that we value, and you look at page 6 and dedicating ourselves to democracy, civility, decency, and truth. You know, that's the spirit of this resolution. That's the spirit that Lester C. Hunt brought to his service, and I appreciate this resolution for honoring his service.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report it, that do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution 2, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Senate Joint Resolution 2 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 5. Reading clerk will read in the resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 5, Air Force 75th Anniversary, sponsored by Senator Boner. A joint resolution to recognize and congratulate the United States Air Force on the 75th anniversary of its founding. It was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Pappas, acting chairman.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, do so with favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution 5. There is a standing committee amendment. I ask that that be read at this time.
Senate Joint Resolution 5, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 11, B4.
Senator Boner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will go ahead and move standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 5 and explain both the resolution and the amendment. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're currently in the 75th year of the United States Air Force's existence as a separate branch of the military. This resolution honors that service and all the tens of thousands of airmen, perhaps more, that have served in Wyoming during that time frame. So, simply put, we're kind of going through a history in the resolution of the Air Force presence here in our state. First of all, noting that it was founded in September of 1947, but really our history goes back before that to the Army Air Corps and the significant strategic bombing training mission that happened in central Wyoming at Casper Army Airfield. And of course, we know the current presence we have here in the southeast corner of the state with Warren Air Force Base, the oldest continuously active Air Force base in the whole country, also one without an active runway. Nice little tidbit there. So as I'm sure we know, since the enactment or since the transfer of Warren to the Air Force at its founding as a service, the primary mission has been strategic deterrence. And so we see all the different missile systems that have been operated by members of Warren Air Force Base, starting with the Atlas, moving on to the Minuteman systems, both Minuteman 1 and Minuteman 2. Actually, we're the only state to ever deploy the Peacekeeper system, the most advanced ICBM ever fielded, the most powerful combat unit in the whole United States military was the 400th Missile Squadron north of here, between Laramie County, Platte County, and Goshen County. And of course, I'm sure we're all aware that will be the first base to deploy the Sentinel missile, the newest addition to our strategic deterrent force. In addition to that, in addition to the unit, the 90th Missile Wing that operates those systems, we also have the headquarters unit for all of our land-based missiles here at 20th Air Force. There's a few other things, obviously, that are really important and contribute to the Air Force mission. Detachment 940 at the University of Wyoming is our Air Force ROTC program over the hill in Laramie. And of course, our own Wyoming National Guard has been defending not just our nation, but our state. They've deployed in just about every conflict that we've had since their formation in Korea, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iraq, and around the world. And of course, we're well aware of the contributions of our National Guard here at home, whether it be fighting fires, floods, or even helping out during the COVID-19 pandemic with personnel in our hospitals. We're acknowledging the role that the state of Wyoming has played and continues to play in telling that story at the Wyoming Veterans Memorial Museum, as well as Quebec One Missile Work Facility, and renewing our dedication to continuing to partner with the U.S. Air Force on their 75th anniversary and continuing to promote the important role that they played in our state's and nation's history. So that's the resolution, Mr. Chairman. We'll go over the amendment real quick. Just making technical corrections, spelling errors with Casper Army Airfield. Apparently that's 2 words, not 1. Never been to an airfield for the Army, so I guess I messed that one up. Making absolutely clear that the Peacekeeper is no longer operational. Changing alumni with alumnus, and also inserting memorial for our Veterans Museum, making sure that the full official title is correctly reflected in the resolution. So with that being said, I'll stand for questions on the standing committee amendment.
Any questions?
Call for the question.
Call for the question. All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion to adopt the standing committee amendment 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 5, please say aye. Those opposed? The motion to adopt standing committee 1 has passed. We're back on the resolution.
That concludes the resolution. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution 2, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Senate Joint Resolution 2 is passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our...
Off we go into the wild blue yonder.
Order, please. Order.
That's the Army guy.
The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 178. The clerk will read the bill.
128.
Excuse me. My correction. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 128. The clerk will read the bill.
Senate File 128, Transfer of State Lands Exchange, sponsored by Senator Hicks, an act relating to state lands, was referred to Committee Number 7, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I was still off in the wild blue yonder.
Are you back down?
I hope so, sir. Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 128, Transfer of State Lands Exchange. It's a very straightforward bill, and I know that our good Senator Hicks will do a great job.
Mr. Majority Leader, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just bring you Senate File 128 and ask for your favorable consideration. This was brought to me by the Office of State Lands. They found an archaic provision in their statutes that whenever we do land exchanges with the federal government, it has to be on an acre per acre basis. In fact, in my time here in the legislature, we've authorized several land exchanges based on value. That's all this does, is come in, and if you go in there, it gets rid of equal area and brings in subject to WS 36-111, which is the statutes that says we do it on equal value. That's all it does, is bring it up to date with conforming practices from an archaic statute. Mr. Chairman, stand for any questions. If there's no questions, I'd call for the question.
Are there any questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Case's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, that do so with a favorable recommendation for Senate File 128, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Senate File 128 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 178.
Senate File 178, Mountain Lion Pursuit Season, sponsored by Senator Boner, an act relating to game and fish, was referred to Committee Number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Jones, and Schuler. No, Senator Guru. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 178 do pass. And there is a standing committee amendment. I'd ask that you would read that in, please.
Senate File 178, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 3, after.
I'll move the Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 178, and I will call on Senator Boner to describe the bill and the amendment.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a bill that will help facilitate the hunting of mountain lions. The idea here is that this will not just help out the hunting public, but also help out our ag producers who would benefit for a more efficient pursuit and ultimately kill of these predators which deprivate livestock. So what this bill does is pretty simple. It allows for a lion pursuit season. So you do not have to necessarily be out there trying to fill a tag. You can keep your dogs, and canines are used primarily in this type of hunting. You can keep your dogs well trained and sharp. So the idea is that you can have this sort of a new season. It's differentiated from a more traditional season called a pursuit season established on page 2. Obviously, we have to have conforming changes all throughout the bill to include in the penalty section for violating the pursuit season. Really, that's kind of the whole point of the bill, Mr. Chairman. Like I said, it's a pretty simple concept. We heard lots of positive feedback from the folks who do this sort of work. And what they said is that this allows them not just to train their dogs, it also trains the lions to have a healthy respect of humans, of dogs. Every once in a while, you'll have a situation where these lions get into a more populated area and you're risking your pets, you're risking your livestock when that happens. This helps teach the lions a little bit of respect for humans and dogs. It helps these individuals to go out and do these hunts. It gives them an incentive to not avoid taking a lion until the very end of the season, which is sort of the status quo right now. They'll wait until the very end of the season because that's the only way they can actually go out and pursue a lion is before they filled their tag. So this is a common provision in many neighboring states. It's been, this concept has been vetted by the agency, by the Game and Fish, and that's what well, part of the amendment is about. So I'll explain the amendment if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. It's a few changes here. Once, first concept's on line 6 of the amendment, saying that basically these pursuit seasons will only occur in the areas where there's an actual hunting season. So this is brought to our attention by some of the ag producers that, we don't want it just to be a free-for-all. It has to be actually in the area where they're going to be lion hunting. Also, we want to delete any references to capturing. We think it's okay to go ahead and capture. We don't want somebody to, to actually tree a lion and have that be interpreted as violating the intent of the legislation. So we went ahead and deleted the words capture because that didn't really work well with the intent of the bill. Additionally, on line 16, we see this is something that the commission requested just to clean up, make sure that they have the proper rule-making authority, and it's very clear in statute, so for ease of their administration. So that's the bill, that's the amendment. I'll stand for any questions on the amendment.
Any questions? Not hearing any. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to adopt the Standing Committee 1 to Senate File 178, please say aye. Those opposed? The motion to adopt Standing Committee 1 has passed. We're back on the bill.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that completes the explanation of the bill. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that lion season right now is July 1st through June 30th, which is all year. So would this just pertain to areas where the quota's been filled and basically the season is closed because the quota's filled, or would a closure due to the quota still allow them to run the dogs? I'm a little confused by that. And secondly, how do we differentiate between somebody that's actually trying to train his dogs and somebody that's out harassing wildlife? That would be my questions.
Senator Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the seasons vary by the area, and the testimony we heard in committee is that on the west side of the state, there's more limitations, so that would be more relevant there. On the east side of the state, there is the situation that we heard about from my colleague from the previous speaker. And so it's, we can't get into that business in statute of determining, which areas have different seasons, so it will be relevant, especially on the west side of the state. And who knows how that might change, moving forward. As far as the ability to distinguish between somebody who is pursuing a mountain lion who's just harassing it, I mean, this is, first of all, this only deals with mountain lions. So if somebody has their dogs out there and they're harassing an elk or a deer, that'd be a violation under current set. We're not changing anything here. It only deals with mountain lions. We have to trust, I think, the professionals in the Game and Fish Department to be able to tell the difference between somebody who's doing this professionally and somebody who's just kind of messing around. But I submit that there's natural consequences of not having a dog that's properly equipped to pursue a mountain lion also. that, there's probably a pretty significant deterrent there. I also point out, something we heard in committee is that there's actually been studies as to the level of stress that a mountain lion feels when it's being pursued. It's actually quite minimal. And we could refer to some of the wildlife experts here. But so as far as the consequences of pursuing a mountain lion in a way that is ineffectual, it's very minimal, and frankly, I can imagine the consequences will be borne by the person that's ineffectually pursuing the mountain lion.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, just to add on to the good information there from the bringer of the bill, the Game and Fish folks also talked a little bit about the harvest mortality units that they take a look at. Those quotas are re-examined every 3 years. So they have a pretty good idea if there's a large number of mountain lion in a certain hunting area, and there may be an unlimited quota there, whereas someplace else there might not be. So I think they have a pretty good handle on this. It's pretty interesting to hear from the folks that actually train these hounds. It takes about 2 years to get these dogs where they become very efficient in helping to hunt these animals. So it's quite a good science, and I think this bill really helps with that. Thanks.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 178, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Senate File 178 has passed the Committee of the Whole. I'd like to, I might have misspoke, so I want to simply repeat that Senate Joint Resolution 5 has passed the Committee of the Whole. If I misspoke it, I might have misspoke saying Joint Resolution 2. So again, Senate Joint Resolution 5 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File, I'm sorry, Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I request the Committee of the Whole stand at ease to the sound of the gavel at 10 after 4 for a short break. Stand at ease.
Until the sound of the gavel. The Senate will come to order. Let me do that again. The Senate will come to order. My prerogative. The next, excuse me. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 92. The clerk will read in the bill.
Senate File 92, Small Customer Electrical Generation, sponsored by Senator Case, an act relating to net metering, was referred to Committee Number 7, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Case, Landon, Scott. No Senators Barlow and Boner. Senator Landon, acting chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 92. There is a standing committee amendment. I'd ask that that be read in at this time.
Senate File 92, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 4, line 21, delete.
I would move that amendment, Mr. Chairman, and I would ask that you call on the good senator from Fremont County for an explanation of the bill. Thank you.
The Honorable Senator from Fremont County, Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 92 deals with individually owned small solar installations and wind energy installations, and it deals with the way that those facilities are compensated. Mr. Chairman, right now we have a system that's called net metering. And what that means is within your electric bill in a month, you have facility on your house, say you produce 100 kilowatt hours, and then you consume 50 kilowatt hours. So then you have a 50 kilowatt hour balance to carry forward to the next month. The next month you may produce less and the utility supplies more, but you net out the number of kilowatts supplied by the utility and the number of kilowatts supplied by your installation each month. If there's a balance at the end of the year, the way it works under current deal is instead of using the retail rates to, in essence, balance out, we use something called the avoided cost. And the avoided cost is the cost that the utility would otherwise incur to buy the electricity if it was on the market at that time. Avoided cost is required by federal law in the 1978 PURPA Act, which requires utilities to buy renewable generation from independent power producers and small installations like this. There's a distortion in the system, and we've talked about on this floor before, and in fact, this Senate has passed a bill very similar to this before. And what this bill does is take the bill we had before, and it actually extends a grandfathering period. Because we understand, Mr. Chairman, that people spend a lot of money to install solar. I'm not making this up, but we had someone explained that they had spent $250,000 in committee today. That was the testimony over several years on their system. That's an astounding number. In all those expenditures, they weren't able to get off the grid completely, although that's their goal. So they still rely on the utility to back them up. And it's the backing up piece that's the problem. So, Mr. Chairman, there's also a built-in problem with the way utility rates are set. In economics, we have this thing called, we call it a two-part tariff frequently. It means you have one charge to pay for the fixed costs and you have another charge to pay for the energy. So if that two-part tariff were working perfectly, we wouldn't really have this problem, Mr. Chairman, because everybody would cover the fixed cost of the utility in their monthly charges. The trouble is, Mr. Chairman, that if we had monthly charges that fully reflected the fixed costs, the monthly charge would be multiple times the monthly charge we have now. So for example, there's a very big, large investor-owned utility that serves most of the people in Wyoming. It doesn't serve in this fair city, but it serves in other communities. And their monthly charge is about $20. And so $20 goes to the monthly cost. Some of those are not really costs to the system. They're costs like for billing and having the line to your house perhaps, and maybe for someone to come read the meter, which they don't do anymore. They drive by and use radio. But that only recovers a part of the necessary cost of the system. The rest of the system costs, more than 2/3, Mr. Chairman, are recovered in the per kilowatt hour rate. And so what happens in this situation is that if everybody in the back row here, say we all are on this utilities connected. The people in the back row here, we decide to install rooftop solar. And each month there is this net metering thing. And so that at the end of the year, we add up the kilowatt hours that we actually paid for. We're going to pay for fewer than you guys out front because we have facilities to generate our own electricity and we trade it for net metering. The trouble is that on December 18th, which might be the coldest day of the year, or really it's any time when the sun goes down and we all have to use that system. But we all have to use the system at its peak, and that's when it's most expensive. And so we build the system for the peak. Now the problem is that this back row, they're paying the same monthly charge as everybody here, but they're using less kilowatts, even though they contribute to the peak just as much. That's where the problem comes in with the rate design on net metering. There are other sources of the subsidy as well, Mr. Chairman, but that is the biggest one. What's the solution? Well, take your monthly fee and triple it. And we've decided, well, no, that's not very good for poor people and very small users. So for equity reasons, we have not done that in this country. Every utility has a similar story about their rate structure. It's custom. The problem is, though, as more and more people install the ability to generate their own electricity, we move from this row, we come up to this row, and they're also contributing less to the fixed costs. And then this row decides to do it. You can see the problem. The fixed costs aren't getting covered. So what this bill does, Mr. Chairman, is to try to get us to figure out how to stop this subsidy from happening, where people that are using the system really just as much as other people and contribute to the cost just as much as other people are not covering it. And so what the bill does, Mr. Chairman, is it says, you know, we shouldn't be deciding this in the legislature. It's the Public Service Commission that needs to decide this issue. And so it puts the decision about the issue to the Public Service Commission. But, Mr. Chairman, we do realize, very definitely realize about the investment that people have made, the expectations they have, the fact that the net metering rate is very generous for some of them. Testimony in committee by that large electric company was that it was 10 cents a kilowatt hour when the actual cost of the electricity that could be obtained elsewhere might be on the order of 2 or 3 cents. So what we've done with the bill, Mr. Chairman, to solve this little conundrum is to give people a very long grandfather period. In the bill, it's 16 and a half years. So it says everybody in this row and you guys, and say we're going to let people get in the system for another year and a half. So the guys in the third row can jump in and install generation capacity. But everybody has to get it operational by July 1st, 2024. So more than a year away. And then they can enjoy, for 15 years after that, compensation based on the net metering rate, the netting out. You get paid full retail with the system we have now with a true up at the end of the year. That's the best idea I can come up with to protect the investment that people have made and to go forward and transition to a system that's more sustainable. When we go back to my examples of the rows, okay? Right now, really, it's only me and this senator here that have the electricity generation on our homes. But we know, and we know that penetration is less than 1%, Mr. Chairman. But we also know that in this city, it's growing at a rate of 10% a year. So I don't know about you, but you know about compounding interest in the rule of 72, that means it would double in 7.2 years. So doubles, 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 puts real struggle on the rate system, Mr. Chairman. That's why we've got to do something. So that's why the idea is to give everybody a chance to get in by July 1st, 2024, then have them have the net meter rate for 15 full years. But new customers that decide to do this after July 1st, 2024, install their systems, they'd have a rate that's established by the PSC. The PSC has a standard they must employ when setting rates. It's called just and reasonable, and they would use that standard in applying the rate, Mr. Chairman. There's one other piece of this subsidy you guys can think about a little bit too. You know, when it's summertime and the sun is high in the air, high in the sky, solar energy is very productive, for example. In the wintertime, wind happens to be a little better. But solar energy in the summer is, rooftop solar is cranking out pretty good. But the problem, Mrs. Chairman, is that we're buying that rooftop solar, in the case of the testimony from the very large utility this morning, at over 10 cents a kilowatt hour. But there is power available from solar sources, industrial scale sources, at 2 cents or less in the summertime, Mr. Chairman. So what we have to do, because I can't shut this row off. You know, I can't say, stop producing so that we can buy the cheap power for everybody so we can all benefit and still be green and still have renewables. I can't do that. I've got to accept all that you want to give me. As a consequence, the only people I can shut off are the cheap solar power that's on the market. And that's what happens in the summer. In the winter, it can be kind of the opposite. First off, we're probably not producing much solar power. We might be producing some wind, but that's also a time when it's very expensive to pay back the generation that you did in the summer. It's very expensive in December when we have to fire up a coal plant and use that production and the cost of coal to supply the bank for the money you've banked in since summer. That's part of it. There's one more angle to all this, Mr. Chairman, and that's a lot of folks think that they're doing a really good thing for the planet because they're combating global warming and they have these installations in our system. And they are helping the planet, and I want to help the planet. But unlike states like Washington and California and Oregon, Wyoming, we're not quite there yet. We don't have a legal framework that says this is a good thing and we're going to work for it. The legislature has never adopted a policy in that area. So I think it's kind of a premise without policy support from the legislature, and a premise that wants to be upheld by the public utility system. And the people that get hurt, Mr. Chairman, are the people that can't afford to put renewable energy either on their rooftop, or they don't have a backyard, they live in apartments, they may be too poor, they may be elderly. They end up having to provide more of the cost of the fixed cost of the system. And that's just not fair. So I'm not trying to, and despite the rhetoric, I wouldn't call a 15-year grandfathering killing rooftop solar, but that's been the rhetoric. I would like to find a way where we can have renewables in our grid, renewables at the individual customer level, and make sure that other customers aren't harmed. Because that's the only way that we can serve this row, this row, this row, and that row, and maybe a few exceptions in between, because that's the only way it's going to make sense. We have to come up with a rate structure that encourages it, compensates it appropriately, but doesn't place a burden on other customers. That's what this bill's about, and it shifts it to the Wyoming Public Service Commission, where the experts are, but it grandfathers from right now for almost 16 and a half years your installation you have now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, the amendment, I don't know if you want to do it now or however that. The amendment is housekeeping only, it's not policy. So, Mr. Chairman, the amendment, there's one place where the grandfather was not correct. It's on page 4, line 21. That language should be, I think that's the right one. Oh, I'm sorry, let me get it from this one. Yeah, it's page 4, line 21. That January 1st, 2034 should read July 1st, 2039. That matches the other grandfathering. And then also, Mr. Chairman, as part of the amendment, on page 5, line 3 is just deleted from the bill. That was new language that was left over from a previous version. So that paragraph A on page 5 would now read, consistent with other provisions of this chapter, the net energy measurement for existing small customer generators as provided in WS 37-19-105A shall be calculated in the following manner. And there's one more piece of this I probably should tell you about. We're changing some vernacular because net metering has been used two ways. It's been used to talk about having this ability to produce energy, but it's also been used to refer to the compensation mechanism, this netting out mechanism of the retail rates that I've talked about. I think it's a good idea to separate the two uses. So we keep net metering for the compensation arrangement. For the physics, we call it the small customer generation. Sorry, I'm happy to answer any questions. We could do the amendment. It's really not a policy issue.
Any questions on the amendment? Question. I think Senator Landon, you moved the amendment, did you not? So, seeing no questions, all those in favor of Senator Landon's motion to adopt the Standing Committee Amendment 1 to Senate File 92, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion to adopt Standing Committee 1 has passed. We're back on the bill. Any questions? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do appreciate that the learned bringer of this bill did give us a very good lesson, and I'm certainly learning a lot about this. Part of what we do in this legislation, we educate ourselves. We also have to educate our constituents. And many of my constituents that are involved in this, and in full disclosure, my family has 3 of these grid tie systems, if you will, in our family. So part of our job is also to educate. So if you'll take a look at Section 4 of the bill, Section 4 of the bill is, okay, we want someone with authority, i.e. that commission that's responsible for utilities, to go out and actually figure out what this may do. My preference is we actually do Section 4 first before we actually change the law and put this into motion, so that we do educate ourselves and our constituents about the impacts and the consequences of doing it or not doing it. So my preference, Mr. Chairman, is I'm not in support of the bill in its current form, and if it continues forward, I will bring some suggestions about how we actually gather information before we implement, not implement, and then figure it out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand in support of this bill, except I don't support the back row. So the reason why I say that is this is an equity issue. And I guess before I'll start talking is I've been a master electrician for 40 years in this state, 40 years. I understand this issue. And I say it's an equity issue, a fairness issue, because the facts are, as was stated, I'm going to try to say it another way, is that non-solar or renewable energy people that are doing the net metering are in fact subsidized by anyone else who is not. Anyone else. Because the opportunity to supply power has to always be there, fact one. You're not paying for any of the maintenance to said systems. And that goes back to the generation, distribution, transformers, that guy that comes out, the lineman that fixes your power at night, that is getting up at 2 in the morning because your lights went out. You're not paying for any of that, because when you sell the power back, you're selling it for the cost you bought it for. So the facts are mathematically, non-generators of these renewables are being subsidized by the normal ratepayer. And that's why it's an issue to me, and I really appreciate the work that was put into this, because obviously it's very complicated and people have made investments. But I think it's a very good start on finally tackling this issue for the sake of fairness for the ratepayers that do not enjoy the net metering system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon?
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate the words of the senator from Sweetwater. I just wanted to rise and help the Senate know why I voted for this bill. I had my reservation because I got as many emails on this one as you did. And I understand. One thing I just want to emphasize is that this does not take anything away. And it certainly does nothing for 16 and a half years. But what it does, it puts it in the hands of professionals who do this. This is a holdover subsidy in our statutes that's probably run its course. It's time for a little bit of a course correction, and I feel like that's in order. That doesn't mean that the Public Service Commission isn't going to come up with a system that will reward those with a rooftop solar unit on their house. It doesn't mean they're not going to reward them. Very well might. Through rules and regs, they're going to come up with a system that they feel like is going to be balanced and equitable for everybody on that system. And sometimes it's a little painful to get out of the ruts. It's like you're up in the mountains, you know, and you've got your pickup and you're in the ruts. It's a little bouncy when you try to get up on level ground again, right? Well, that's kind of where we are with this issue. And that's why I voted for it, Mr. Chairman. I think it's the right thing to do and gets us on the road to someday having a more sustainable system.
Mr. Minority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions regarding the timing, and I do appreciate this approach. I just think the central approach aspect of it, of having the Public Service Commission do calculations based on math and reason and science and all of that, that's pretty good. Makes good sense. The questions I have, though, is kind of with the legacy approach, the transition, and how a lot of this gets done with the timeline. I think of products that I've recently seen on the market that have been for sale over the last few years that are more like 25 and 30-year roofs, realistically, for solar panels. Some of the more advanced, better products really are looking at that type of a lifetime, and I'm concerned with the possibility that somebody may have amortized the cost of that operation relative to savings over a longer period of time than the 15-year window. I don't think that probably has occurred a lot, but it may have occurred. And so I'm concerned as to whether or not that was discussed and whether the 15-year timeline is sufficient. At the same time, we have a startup date effectively of July 1st, 2024. So up until that point, you could purchase basically anything. There's fair notice from now moving until then where you might want to contemplate an amortization for 15 years. The question I have is, was there discussion about that being perhaps a 2025 date and getting to the good senator from up in Campbell County, having a road show ahead of that to sort of seek some input and ease the transition timeline, so that there certainly is a lot of concern about this bill and other bills like it. I like the approach, but we know that perhaps easing it out there a little bit and making sure that we have buy-in and input might be useful. So those are the questions. But again, overall, I do think this is the most thoughtful approach to implementing a transition to recognize the fixed costs that we've seen in certainly the years that I've been contemplating it. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on and for the bill, we need to do something here. The as was explained, this is, the current system is simply unsustainable. It hasn't caused major trouble to date because there haven't been enough of them. The effect has really been relatively small. But at the rate of growth, that's not going to be the case. We're going to get a system that is grossly unfair as this thing grows, as was explained. And if you think it's hard to change now, think of the volume of communications you're going to get when there are twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the number of these installations around. And people are scared, and we're starting to really do some harm to the rest of the people on the grid who can't afford these kind of installations. So if we procrastinate it, if we decide to educate ourselves more, if we stretch it out, because that July 1, 2024 date is key, because that's when the growth stops, or the magnitude of the growth stops. We are going to get ourselves in just an increasing trouble, and find it more and more difficult to fix the problem. And I think some other states are experiencing. They've had to fix it, and it has been much more difficult the longer you let this problem grow. So far, it hasn't done major harm, but it is on the verge of doing it. So, Mr. Chairman, I would urge the Senate to pass the bill and to not extend the deadlines for stopping the growth, and that's the July 1, 2024 deadline. That is, I think, an essential piece of the bill.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear on this, and I should declare I'm associated with a co-op, but and the good senator from Sweetwater kind of broached in and went into this topic. So what was once subsidized, still subsidized, but what's making it better to be subsidized this time? Help me understand this.
Question being called. Pardon me, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that I heard the question over there, and maybe you could repeat it. While I will address our good colleague from Laramie, that it doesn't go away in 16 and a half years. It just shifts to the PSC rate. And honestly, you guys, I don't know what that's going to look like in 16 and a half years. I think nationwide, we're going to have more of a commitment to decentralized and neighborhood level power production. The compensation mechanisms may be totally different. We may have batteries or other forms of storage. So I think you could, a 20-year investment, yeah, it's guaranteed under net metering for 16 and a half years, but it's not like it's going to go to zero after that. I can't tell you what the future holds, but I know it'll be different. I did not get the good question from Star Valley.
Sure, thank you. Just a little more on the
Senator
subsidy.
Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little more on the subsidy part. Floor leader called for a question, but I'd like to understand that because there is a lot of investment out there that somebody's packing the load on that as far as paying for it. Help me understand how this fits in.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Case.
We know that the subsidies come about because of the fixed cost and the fact that you're compensating on a per kilowatt hour basis. So in essence, the person that producing their own small power doesn't buy as many kilowatts as the person next door to them, say. But then on that time when they have to draw on the system, they may actually have a bigger house and draw more than the person, or they may draw the same amount, but they contribute less to fixed costs. That's the most clear, definitive subsidy. Another subsidy occurs because when people are making solar and putting it in the bank, that's a time when solar is very plentiful and cheap for the system because there's large-scale utility power that we could have bought, but we weren't able to because we were forced to take the production from the homeowner. Mr. Chairman, communities decide this different ways. And so, like the state of Washington, for example, has a different aspect about this. They feel that it's the non-solar people's obligation to support the solar, for example. We have cooperatives in Wyoming that have also exhibited a bit of a commitment down that road. And I believe that one of them is up in your neck of the woods, sir. So how cooperatives fit into this? Right now, cooperatives aren't directly rate regulated. They can become rate regulated if customers complain. If 5% sign a petition, it goes to the PSC. So I think we'll be discussing more about cooperatives and whether they can have policies that are different, because they are member-owned, and they make decisions about this. And I did speak to the representative that represents all the cooperatives, and he's going to bring an amendment tomorrow that we can talk about. Whether it fixes it or not, I did not commit to that amendment, but it's something between the PSC and the REAs. So you might be interested in that, and that might deal with your community or the community up close to Grand Teton Park, very concerned about doing this in the neighborhood. Very concerned there's kind of a community pressure to do that. And I understand that. But we don't have that same dedication at the state level. It's never been articulated by this legislature, and we are the representatives. So in that instance, it's probably not the right idea to use the utility rate structure to handle these kind of decisions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 92, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Senate File 92 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 158. Reading clerk will read the bill.
Senate File 158, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to public employees. It was referred to Committee Number 2, which turned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Nethercutt, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 158, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions. We've been at this a while, so I will endeavor to be brief and to the point. We being the state of Wyoming, have a $2.5 billion unfunded pension liability. The way to address that, the only way to address that is you have to put more money in. So what's the least painful way to do that? Split it with the employees, 50-50, at a time when the employees are getting 2 raises in a row. Last year, we approved the governor's phase 1 of his pay plan, which on average was an 8% pay hike to get people to market. And if we adopt this year his recommendation, it'll be another 8%. That's 16%. The proposal is, of that 16, to have the employees put in 0.5% more into their pension, and the state to contribute another 0.5%. And what that does is achieves the goal that we have baked into statute for our pension funds, which is that they will be at 100% funding within 30 years. We're not at that market now. We're not at that mark now due to adverse market experience. There's a couple of different graphs in there. One is just assuming that life goes on and they keep earning 6.8% in the fund. And the other is more realistic, reflecting last year's loss of 7%. And so that, pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's 2 exhibits we've handed out. I'm sorry, I'm getting punchy too. 2 exhibits. One is titled SF 158, Public Employee Retirement Plans Contribution. And that's from the state plan, which gives you plenty of information. And the other is a memo from staff about the 2 pay plan increases that the governor's improved, the takeaway being 8% and 8%. So the 0.5% would be as little pain to the employee as possible. So the graphs, let's go to the second page of the memo. The graph at the bottom makes it look like by 2052, the plans will be fine. But you'll see it's titled under standard experience, assumed 6.8% return. And the plan doesn't have confidence, nor do their actuaries have confidence that this scenario is going to hold, nor that there will be 6.8% return going forward. The more likely scenario is on page 3, which has 2 lines. The bottom one shows by 2052, with a negative loss in 2022, adverse experience, more realistic. We're still shy of 100% in 2052. But with the additional 1% contribution by 2052, we hit 102% funding. The significance of the 100% is you've got to hit that to meet all your liabilities, and you have to exceed that if you're going to ever hope to have a cost of living increase. And I know we've all heard from the retirees about wanting a cost of living increase, and it can't happen unless these plans get solid. So that's the plan. The state kicks in 0.5%, the employees kick in 0.5%, and we begin to whittle down that accrued liability. I'll stand for questions.
Questions? No questions? Question? Senate Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of questions. One is these numbers in terms of the actuarial soundness projections moving forward vary rather dramatically. We've seen them over time, and it's my understanding that really Wyoming's retirement systems tend to be the most sound, among the most sound in the country of any state's retirement system. We can always add more and we can make it more sound. But I guess my question is this change in projections effectively simply based on the last year reconfiguring everything moving forward, and if there were a good year afterwards, we'd come back and we'd reconfigure it all again? Or is this something that's been worked on through CapFin for quite a while? My next question really kind of comes down to the genesis of this. Was this legislation from the interim, and was this a study topic of the Joint Appropriations Committee, or kind of where and when did this come from? If we could walk through the history of it, because I wasn't familiar with this. And the last thing that I do just want to reiterate, which I think is the case, is that it would be 0.5% new funds from the state, and then 0.5% from the employee side. So I just want to make sure that 0.5% from the state is new funding from the state. So those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good questions from the senator from the Ivory Tower. So this is a question that's constantly being reviewed and evaluated, particularly by the board for the Wyoming retirement system. A number of us have served as liaisons to that board and continue to serve in that capacity as well. And ensuring that the state's pension funds are appropriately and adequately funded to meet the liabilities associated with them, meaning can they pay out to retirees and potential retirees what they have earned and what they are owed. So right now that fund is at about 77% funded. That's not bad, but our actuarials who evaluate the fund at all times thinks it is prudent and advisable to increase it by at least 2%. We had chosen not to go that direction as a result of the impacts that that presents to both employees and retirees and to the state for costs associated with funding the pension, and have reached this, this lower amount than what actually would be advised by the actuarials right now for best practices. Again, the fund is strong and is solvent and is secure, but just for a matter of keeping an eye on the fund's performance and ensuring that it is fully funded for all of our Wyoming folks who receive those benefits, which I believe is about a total of 600,000, both current and former employees that are on the fund. So a high number of people, that this is a prudent move for us to take at this time. So constantly being considered, was reviewed by the Joint Appropriations Committee in the interim, and of course your Senate Appropriations Committee now.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add on, it's like, why now? Why this? You know, it's all about the time value of money. It's merely a question of, by doing this now, we move the ball down the field towards actuarial soundness. By not doing it now, it just puts it farther away. So these dollars compound on themselves as the employees and the employers invest in the plan. The dollars multiply, so the day comes sooner. Right now, we talk about if we do this, it'll become actuarially sound at 100% in 2030. If we don't, if we wait a year, it could be 2050, depending on the markets, depending on a lot of other factors. But the point of it is, by doing it now, we get closer to that day, no matter, at any level, no matter what the markets do, no matter what else happens, because that's the way money compounds. That's what we call the time value of money. It's all about that, and opportunity cost, just stuff you learn in Econ 101. And so that's why we're on and for this. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to correct what I just said, this is what happens, good senators, when I recall what I visually saw. I don't think about what I am saying, but I did see 600,000 or 600 million actually is what was paid out. And this is on your handout, I believe, that the good chairman passed out, with about 80% of that staying in Wyoming, 79%. So 600 million was paid out in benefits last year. So that's how much is being paid out. So when you talk about whether or not the fund is appropriately funded to meet those obligations and anticipated payouts, these are the dollars that are currently being discussed. Number of active employees in Wyoming is a little over 34,000, and the number of pensioners is 30,000. So 60,000 people receiving state pension benefits for that total payout of $640 million. Thank you.
Any other questions? No other questions? All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, that it do so with favorable recommendation of Senate File 158, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Senate File 158 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 7.
Senate Joint Resolution 7, Support for Taiwan, sponsored by Senator Driscoll. A joint resolution in support of Taiwan was referred to Committee Number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Guru, Jones, and Schuler. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that they do so with the recommendation that Senate Joint Resolution 7 do pass. I would call on President Driscoll if he's here, but I don't believe he's here, is he? Yes. Okay, I believe, Majority Floor Leader may take this.
Mr. Majority Leader.
I'm a reluctant volunteer, Mr. Chairman, but I know you folks want to get to dinner, so this is the only thing keeping you between dinner.
Question.
Question on the resolution.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you've been here for a while, we've done this, and this is just to re-up existing resolutions. So what I'm not going to read everything, I'm just going to go to page 3 in section 1. And so now therefore be it resolved, the members of the Wyoming Legislature of the State of Wyoming reaffirms its commitment to a strong and deepening relationship between Taiwan and the State of Wyoming. This is the meat of it, subsection 2. The Wyoming supports Taiwan's participation in international organizations, global trade, health, self, and well-being of the 23 million people in Taiwan. Taiwan. And in section 3, Wyoming reiterates its support for close economic and trade partnership with Taiwan and the United States through our bilateral trade agreement. This agreement will be submitted by the Secretary of State to the President of the United States, President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Congress, Wyoming's congressional delegation, the Taiwan President, and the Taipei Economic Cultural Office, Seattle and Washington. Ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Any questions? Senator Schuler.
I'll just make this, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this very, very short and sweet. I did ask the question this morning, what is the largest export from Wyoming to Taiwan? And I assumed it was beef. And I was told that because we have a lack of processing beef capacity, there's the interest is there. They like our beef and they even like our lamb, but that's kind of waned a little bit. But guess what the top 2 are that we export? It is Trona and Rare Gas. Just wanted to let you know that. And distilling is coming in a close third, craft distillers. So just thought I'd add that.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Anything else? Any other questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution 7, say aye. Those opposed? Senate Joint Resolution 7 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You have heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
The reading clerk will read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. Vice President, the Committee of the Whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 89 failed to pass Committee of the Whole and was indefinitely postponed. Senate File 130 do pass. Senate Joint Resolution 2 do pass amended. Senate Joint Resolution 5 do pass amended. Senate File 128 do pass. Senate File 178 do pass amended. Senate File 92 do pass amended. Senate File 158 do pass. Senate Joint Resolution 7 do pass. Senator Salazar, Chairman.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried, and the report has been adopted. Oh, shoot. That horse got out of the paddock pretty darn quick. Please, go ahead. I spoiled your moment. I spoiled your whole moment, Tim.
Oh, I'm so excited. Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report.
Yes! You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Motion carried and the report has been adopted. Senator Cooper.
Mr. Vice President, privilege of the floor for just a
Please.
moment. I'd like to let everybody know that as much as it pains me to publicly admit this, I'm in full agreement with what the majority floor leader said earlier about my grandson and his extreme intelligence. I'd like to put that out front. And with that said, I'd like to introduce you to his father. This is my son, Mike Cooper.
A lot better looking, too. The mic was on, sorry.
Mike, not Mike.
Standing committee reports.
January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 145, State Budgeting and Reserves, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. I, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 166, Border Wall and Sanctuary City Transport. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Kinski, and Salazar. No, Senators Guru and Nethercott. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 3, Revenue, to whom is referred Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, French, Ide, and McEwen. No, Senator Pappas. Senator Beitman, Chairman. January 26, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 169, State Shooting Complex Task Force. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Folks, there are eight budgets, 8 copies of the budget and the SR and a memo that have not been picked up. They made a number equivalent to the number of people who like paper bills. So there's 8 of you that have not yet picked up your budget and probably give you some good reading over the weekend. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. January 27th.
Announcements. Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, Committee Number 4, Education, will meet tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. In room W110 downstairs. Consider following bills. Senate File 132, Study of K-12 Education Program. We heard the testimony on that before. We'll work the bill in the morning. I do not expect more public testimony. Senate File 174, Charter School Authorizing Board, and if time permits, Senate File 50, Charter School Amendments. But on that last bill, I don't think we'll bring that to a vote on tomorrow.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m., your Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet in Connector Room 6 and online to hear 4 bills: Senate File 80, Visitation Rights; Senate File 43, EMS Districts; Senate File 111, Child Abuse, Change of Sex; and Senate Journal SJ0010. The Right of Healthcare Access Constitutional Amendment. We need less words. Thank you.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Your Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet at 5:15 today in room 2 and online to consider one bill, Senate File 170, specifying additional beneficial uses of water. It will be a short meeting.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We picked up a few more bills for the Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. We don't meet until Tuesday, but I thought I'd just give you a heads up. 8 o'clock, we'll meet for Senate File 157, Weed and Pest Mitigation, Tribal Inclusion 2, Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, similar names, and Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation. That'll be next Tuesday. Thank you.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Vice President, for those not in labor in the morning, you're sure welcome to join your Committee 1, Judiciary. We have 3 bills up tomorrow morning in room 1004 downstairs. Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance. Senate File 129, Background Checks, Governor's Office. And we will continue and hopefully finish up Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights. Thank you.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, Military Affairs, will meet tomorrow, January 27th, upon adjournment in Capitol Signature Room W2N online to consider Senate File 160, towing authority for I-80.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Vice President, your Appropriations Committee will meet tomorrow, Friday, January 27th, 8 a.m. in State Capitol Room E301 and online. We'll hear 2 bills, Senate File 90, Wyoming Property Tax Relief Authority, Senate File 141, Transportation Technology Transfer Center Program Funding. Thank you.
That's clear. That's the announcements. You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.